The email arrives without urgency. Subject line: Your monthly statement is ready. John opens it while standing in his kitchen. The room is quiet. The coffee has gone lukewarm. The light from the refrigerator reflects faintly off the counter.
He scrolls. The number is not shocking. It is slightly higher than last month, not dramatically, just enough to notice. He pauses, not because he cannot afford it, but because he recalculates, almost instinctively. Rent cleared 3 days ago. Car insurance drafts next week. Student loan autopay is scheduled. Electricity adjusts seasonally. Health insurance already increased this year.
He closes the app. There is no crisis, no emergency, just a subtle shift in margin. This moment is ordinary. A receipt folded into a wallet. A renewal notice that arrives without ceremony. A subscription quietly adjusting its price. A housing payment that leaves the account on schedule.
Nothing feels dramatic, and yet something feels heavier than expected. The cost of living is rarely experienced as a headline. It is experienced as accumulation, a series of recurring commitments that gradually require more coordination. In the first 2 minutes, nothing appears broken, nothing appears extreme. But a quiet question lingers. Why does maintaining a stable life feel increasingly administratively dense?
John is employed. He is insured. He is not facing eviction. He is not defaulting. And still, each month requires precision. The structure of his expenses is not random. They are organized, predictable, scheduled, digitally synchronized. Housing anchors the largest portion. Insurance protects against risk. Debt reflects past investment. Transportation supports employment. Healthcare maintains continuity. Individually, each cost is rational. Collectively, they form a fixed perimeter. The first structural mechanism begins here. Modern American living is built on recurring obligation rather than episodic expense. The majority of core costs are subscription-like. Housing repeats. Insurance repeats. Debt repeats. Services repeat.
Housing. Housing is typically the largest expense in American households. It functions both as shelter and asset. Mortgage payments include principal, interest, insurance, and property taxes. Rent includes market valuation, operating costs, and future expectations. In many regions, housing costs adjust faster than wage growth. Not abruptly, gradually. When housing rises, other categories compress. Discretionary spending narrows, savings adjust. Location decisions become more strategic. Housing is not simply shelter. It is the anchor that determines how flexible the rest of the budget can be.
Healthcare. Healthcare operates differently from most markets. Costs are not always visible at the point of decision. Insurance premiums are recurring. Deductibles reset annually. Out-of-pocket maximums introduce thresholds. Even when insured, households coordinate copays, prescriptions, preventive care, and emergency uncertainty. Healthcare introduces variability, and variability requires reserve. When reserves are limited, uncertainty becomes heavier.
Insurance. Beyond health insurance, there is auto insurance, home insurance, renter's insurance, disability coverage, life insurance. Each exists to reduce catastrophic risk. Each adds a recurring layer. Insurance is not consumption in the traditional sense. It is a transfer of uncertainty. But uncertainty transferred still requires payment, and payments accumulate.
Wages. Income in the United States often arrives bi-weekly or monthly. Some households rely on variable hours. Some rely on commission. Some manage contract income. Income timing does not always align with expense timing. This misalignment creates micro-adjustments, temporary overdrafts, credit card bridges, delayed transfers. The system assumes income continuity, but income can fluctuate without warning.
Debt. Debt structures time. Student loans extend educational investment across decades. Auto loans spread transportation costs. Mortgages stretch housing across generations. Credit cards smooth short-term gaps. Debt allows access before accumulation, but it also converts past decisions into recurring obligations.
Transportation is not optional in many regions. Vehicle ownership includes payment, insurance, fuel, maintenance, registration. Public transportation carries monthly passes and commuting time. Access to employment often depends on reliable mobility. Transportation links directly to income.
Childcare. For households with children, childcare can rival housing in cost. It determines whether both parents can work. It shapes career decisions. It influences geographic mobility. Childcare is not only an expense, it is a structural gatekeeper for income potential.
Retirement. Retirement contributions represent deferred stability. Employer matches incentivize participation, but participation requires margin. When margins narrow, retirement becomes flexible. The long term yields to the present.
Inflation operates quietly. It does not demand attention daily, but it adjusts baseline expectations. Groceries edge upward. Utilities recalibrate. Service fees update. Each increase small, collectively persistent.
Credit structures. Credit scores determine borrowing cost. Borrowing cost influences housing access. Housing access influences geographic opportunity. Geographic opportunity influences wage potential. Credit is not merely a number. It is a gateway to lower or higher structural cost.
Around minute 25, the first pattern begins to reveal itself. Housing affects debt. Debt affects credit. Credit affects interest rates. Interest rates affect housing access. Healthcare affects job stability. Job stability affects income continuity. Income continuity affects credit. Credit affects insurance premiums in some contexts. Independent systems. Interlocking effects. This is the first pattern recognition moment. The real cost of living is not additive, it is interactive. Each category influences others, not dramatically, but persistently. When one rises, it places tension on the rest. The cost of living is therefore not a number, it is a network. And households operate at the center of that network. John simply reviewing his monthly dashboard, scrolling through categorized expenses, each line item separate, yet collectively synchronized. The pattern is visible now, but incomplete, because the financial system does not only affect budgets, it affects behavior, and behavior reshapes the future.
When the cost of living is experienced as an interconnected system rather than a single number, behavior begins to adjust, not dramatically, not visibly, but consistently. John does not describe himself as financially strained. He pays his bills. He maintains employment. He participates in retirement contributions when possible. From the outside, his life appears stable, but stability now requires ongoing calibration. He checks his banking app more frequently than he did a decade ago. He spaces purchases across pay periods. He considers timing more carefully than price. He delays replacing items that still function. He reviews renewal notices more attentively.
None of this signals crisis. It signals sensitivity. Sensitivity to margin. When multiple systems converge on the same household, even small shifts require adjustment. A modest increase in rent compresses discretionary flexibility. A healthcare deductible reset shifts early year budgeting. An insurance premium recalculation requires rebalancing. Inflation nudges grocery totals higher without announcement. Each movement is manageable, but each movement requires attention. Attention becomes background labor, and background labor accumulates. The cost of living is not only monetary, it is administrative. It requires tracking, monitoring, anticipating, recalculating.
When this administrative load becomes routine, psychological bandwidth narrows. Long-term planning competes with immediate coordination. Career decisions reflect this shift. A job with slightly higher pay but uncertain benefits may feel less attractive than stable coverage. Entrepreneurial risk becomes harder to justify when healthcare is employer-linked. Geographic mobility becomes complex when housing markets vary dramatically. Risk tolerance subtly declines. not because ambition disappears, but because structural rigidity increases. When fixed costs dominate, flexibility becomes expensive. Family timing is influenced in similar ways. Childcare costs reshape employment decisions. Housing size influences household planning. Healthcare access affects long-term consideration. Late at night, John sitting with his laptop open, scrolling through account dashboards. There is no visible frustration, only concentration. He closes the screen. The room returns to silence. This is the lived experience of structural layering. Not dramatic hardship, not visible abundance, but continuous coordination. The cost of living, therefore, extends beyond price indices. It includes time spent managing systems, energy spent anticipating fluctuation, restraint exercised to preserve margin, deferred decisions, narrowed flexibility. The structure does not demand immediate failure. It demands sustained attentiveness. And sustained attentiveness reshapes expectation. At the household level, the cost of living feels like coordination. At the systemic level, it is architecture. Modern American economic life is organized around continuous participation. To live within the system is to engage with multiple parallel frameworks: real estate markets, insurance risk pools, credit evaluation systems, healthcare networks, employment structures, consumer subscription platforms, retirement investment vehicles. Each system operates independently. Each has its own incentives. Each recalibrates according to its own internal logic. Housing prices respond to demand, supply, financing conditions, and regional desirability. Insurance premiums adjust based on actuarial modeling and risk distribution. Credit markets price borrowing based on probability and macroeconomic signals. Healthcare pricing reflects negotiated structures between providers and insurers. Employment compensation responds to labor markets, productivity, and competitive pressures. None of these systems are designed in direct coordination with one another, yet all of them converge at the same point: the household. John does not see systems, he sees line items. But those line items are the visible edges of larger structures.
The architecture reinforces itself through layering. When housing values rise, borrowing capacity expands. Expanded borrowing increases purchase power. Increased purchase power sustains elevated housing prices. When credit becomes more accessible, consumption smooths across time. Smoothing reduces immediate strain, but increases recurring obligation. When recurring obligation increases, income stability becomes more valuable. When income stability becomes more valuable, mobility decreases. When mobility decreases, housing markets stabilize further. These feedback loops are not conspiratorial. They are structural. Healthcare illustrates similar reinforcement. Employer-sponsored insurance links employment to medical access. Medical access encourages employment continuity. Employment continuity supports housing payment stability. Housing stability supports credit stability. Credit stability lowers borrowing cost. Lower borrowing cost sustains asset markets.
Another structural feature emerges here. Costs are increasingly front-loaded or recurring, while gains are often long-term. Education debt precedes income growth. Mortgage interest precedes equity accumulation. Insurance premiums precede protection realization. Retirement contributions precede benefit. Households therefore carry present burden for future stability. When the future remains abstract, the present feels heavier. This temporal imbalance is subtle, but persistent. John appears again here. Morning light. He reviews his retirement statement. The growth is incremental, not dramatic. He closes it, then opens his monthly budget. The contrast between long-term accumulation and immediate obligation is visible. He adapts. Adaptation is the silent stabilizer of the system. Millions of households adapt monthly. They adjust spending, delay upgrades, refinance when possible, monitor carefully. This continuous adaptation prevents structural breakdown. It also normalizes structural density. Over time, the architecture becomes invisible because participation becomes routine, and routine rarely invites examination.
The real cost of living, then, is not simply what is paid. It is the requirement to remain structurally synchronized across multiple independent systems whose timelines and recalibrations do not always align. The question now shifts one final time. If the architecture is stable, if adaptation is widespread, if compression is normalized, what does that mean for how people experience economic life? Not in crisis, but in continuity. We move into reflection. The real cost of living in the United States is often discussed in numbers: median rent, healthcare premiums, inflation percentages, average wages. But numbers alone do not capture structure. The experience is not a single price. It is the interaction of many. It is the alignment of pay cycles with billing cycles. It is the anticipation of renewal adjustments. It is the awareness that stability depends on continued synchronization. John does not describe his life as unstable. He describes it as managed carefully, managed monthly, managed across categories. This management is rarely visible from the outside. There is no headline moment, no singular tipping point, just continuous alignment. The real cost of living includes monetary obligation, administrative attention, temporal commitment, cognitive bandwidth, reduced optionality, not as dramatic hardship, but as ongoing coordination. When coordination becomes the baseline condition of stability, living well requires attentiveness as much as income. The structure does not collapse, it persists, it recalibrates, it expands, it reinforces itself through participation. And participation continues because the system offers opportunity, mobility, and security, but through layered engagement. The question is no longer whether costs are rising or falling in any given year. The deeper question is how complexity shapes experience, how independent systems converge, how households absorb synchronization risk, and how adaptation becomes normal. John stands at his kitchen counter again, phone in hand, not worried, not relieved, just aware. The numbers on the screen are not extraordinary, they are ordinary, and perhaps that is the point. The real cost of living is not found only in what is paid, it is found in what must be continuously managed to remain stable within a layered system. There is no dramatic conclusion here, no collapse, no solution, only structure. And within that structure, millions of households quietly coordinate their lives each month. If this perspective felt familiar, you're not alone. You can share your experience in the comments, not for debate, but to add context to the reality many people quietly live through. And if you want more long-form documentaries about the hidden financial system shaping everyday American life, you can follow The Hidden Cost.